All right. Just make sure we're live here. Okay, great. All right. Let me pop this up on screen here. Okay. Hey, everyone. Happy Sunday. Welcome to the session, and thank you once again for joining me in our weekly Sacred Space session on this, let's see, where are we? Our 46th session, coming up on a year now in a few weeks. So I'll just start by saying I'm honored as always to be with you in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty. And I look forward to sharing time with you here in our sacred space together today. So what we'll do today, we'll follow the same pattern that we've been using for the past few months now, actually, which is I'll go ahead and set sacred space. We'll talk about our overall topic for this week, which is, let's see, the power of delight, the role of delight in healing, which was an interesting topic that came up in our brainstorm. So we'll have that talk. I'll have Gowrie, my editor in Bangalore, come up and share the story she selected for this week. We'll have a little bit of an exercise, and then we'll go ahead and close Sacred Space. And just make sure we're all online here. Okay, great. Also, if you have any issues with the feed on Crowdcast in the chat here, I'm just going to put up the link to Facebook Live if you need that. We watch the chat a little more closely on the Crowdcast side, just so you know. Okay, so we'll get started. So we'd like to set our sacred space, and to do so, I'll start by saying that what we would like to do is to create a space in the space of an hour or two here together online, which is devoid of fear, threat, and control, for us to open to higher guidance from within our own selves, however we choose to define that. It could be a muse that you follow, a guide, intuition, just random flashes of insight and brilliance that come to you in this sort of safe sanctuary space. And in this space, we want to create this so that we can partake of the nourishment, the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that you can only basically get from being in sacred space, either alone or especially together as a group. And in opening sacred space today, I will propose that we all follow the 4 principles of proceeding in sacred space. Number 1 is confidentiality. Standard Vegas rules: what happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now that's the rule when we have in-person gatherings, but when we do these online, it's still confidential, but the way we achieve that is through anonymization. So the way you would do that is if you are watching and you would like to be anonymous, you don't have to be anonymous. You would click into the Crowdcast stream, go into the edit profile sort of feature of Crowdcast, and then just change your username to Harry Potter or Mickey Mouse, what have you. And then come back in and you can chat and ask questions under that new username. You don't have to be anonymous. You don't have to participate or chat. But if you want to and you'd like to be anonymous, you can. So the second principle is no threat or controlling, regardless of intention. Right? So it's not just malicious threat or controlling, but even if it's well-meaning threat and controlling. So there's no fixing, there's no tough love. There's no, well, you're in pain and you need to do this, or else. And the reason for that is there's nothing wrong with a well-meaning, bit of tough love or intervention. But because that intrinsically is of the realm of control and fear and threat, if you don't, let me fix you or help you or whatever, or intervene, you're going to have a bad outcome. So I'm holding this fear, threat, and control over you, ostensibly for your own good. But because it is fear, threat, and control, it falls out of sacred space. It intrinsically goes back into the realm of the profane. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when we are trying to stay in sacred space, not because it's better, but because there's certain things you can only do and achieve in sacred space. We want to stay away from the sort of physics and the levers and the buttons and the dials and knobs of fear, threat, and control. So no threat, no controlling, no fixing, no tough love. We're here to hold space for each other, to be however we actually are, to be afraid, to be anxious, to be happy, to be relaxed. And however we are, we hold space also for however you feel about however you are, right? So if you're afraid, or you're happy, or you're anxious, or you're relaxed, and you feel fine about that, we leave you to feel fine about that. And if you're like happy or stressed or relaxed or fearful, and you feel awful about that, you feel incompetent, you feel like I should be different from however I am, we hold space for that too. So we leave you as you are. And the idea here is that we want to leave you as you are because it is of its own intrinsic value to be in a space every now and then, and here, just an hour or two a week on a Sunday here, where however you find yourself, you can be in a space where you can share emotional and spiritual nourishment with other people, and know that no one will try to intervene or fix or give you a recommendation or otherwise threaten you out of malice or good intention. And that itself creates its own nourishment. The third principle is no commerce. So obviously, given no threat, fear, controlling, fixing, tough love, nothing may be sold. Right? I can't sell you anything. Gowrie can't sell you anything. Please don't sell stuff to each other in the chat or anything. But also a corollary to that is that we also don't recommend things to each other. Right? So even if I say, oh, well, there's this great book you should read, and I'm not associated, I don't get any sort of financial or other benefit from recommending the book. It's just because I read it, I loved it, and I want to recommend it to you as well. Even that we refrain from in sacred space. Now, outside, we can do all of this stuff, right? It's all fair game. But during sacred space, we even refrain from giving recommendations. Because if you say, oh, I'm in a tough way right now, and I say, well, there's this book you should read, even that, right, is a sense of well-meaning threat, right? Anything I offer to you, if you're like, well, I don't know, there's a voice inside you that says, well, I already recommended it, you better try it, or else. And that or else is precisely the thing that we're trying to kind of carve ourselves away from. Not because the or else is intrinsically bad, because we just, we want a time where we can actually just relax and do other things in the physics of human time. Okay. So we are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. We are here for what you are, not for what you do or provide. We're here for you, not for your value add. Okay. And then the fourth principle is no expectation of participation. So there's no pressure to do anything. You can chat, you can not chat, you can ask questions, not ask questions. You can pay attention, you can not pay attention. The nourishment comes from the held space and your presence and attention, from what you are, not from what you do or provide. Now, these four principles are true even when you sit alone in sacred space, if you go for a long run or a hike or a meditation or something. But when we have sacred space in a group, all of us together tends to amplify that effect, so that there's this huge kind of potluck of energy and nourishment that we all create when we're together, even when we're online. And that effect tends to be amplified. So it's like this feast where we come together, and all of us coming together and observing these basic principles creates a set of physics, right? Where there's all this safety and nourishment, all the words we put to it, and all of us kind of gorging on it does not diminish it. It's this kind of magical thing. And that's why we like to come together as a group. Even though we may not know each other, we may be anonymous, that's okay. The intention and the attention and the feeling of mutual protection works to create all of that for each of us. So that is what I am proposing for the next hour or two. And if you are not okay with that, and you can obviously leave anytime. And if you are not okay with that, that's okay. We'll still, no harm, no foul. There's no fear, threat, and control to get you to come to sacred space or get you to stay in sacred space. You come and go as you please. But just as a heads up, we're about to cross the threshold into that sacred space. So if you're not okay with that, that's totally cool. But we will pause here now and give you a moment to make your selection. And if you don't want to move forward, that's okay. You can withdraw from the group now because this plane is taking off. So we'll give you a moment to make your selection. Okay. And for the rest of us now who are left, we will now move forward together into sacred space. And as we cross the threshold into our shared sacred space, I will just remind everyone that we would like to observe the 4 principles of sacred space here: confidentiality/anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, no tough love, no interventions, no commerce, no recommendations, no suggestions, and no expectation of participation. All right. Welcome to Sacred Space, everyone. One of the best parts of my week, and I hope a good part of your week too. So what are we doing this week? So we are, so the topic we're going to talk about today is the role of delight in healing. In the session, our weekly fairy tale brainstorm together with Gary brought us to a reflection on the role of delight in healing, in particular when it comes to the reunion and reconciliation of what we've been calling the inner masculine and the inner feminine. And I'll re-explain all those terms for those of you who are new. And I think Gary has selected a story from the Sicilian folktale tradition. So what I'd like to do now is to invite Gary back up on screen to tell us about the story and to read it to us as well. Hi, Gary.
Hi, Artie. Hi, everyone. Hi.
Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you.
I don't know if to call you like a permanent cast member or a very, very persistently recurring special guest.
A bit of both, I think.
A bit of both. You can reserve. You don't need to lock yourself in. Do you want to tell us about the story?
Yeah. So I found this. There's this massive collection of folk tales by Andrew Lang, who's really collected folk tales from various traditions and put them in a complete series. And what he's done is he's picked stories from different folktale collectors across Europe who either had traveled themselves or mostly traveled themselves and heard these folktales personally from, villagers or peasants or common folk who narrated that to them in their own language. So today's story was originally collected by a Swiss folktale collector called Laura Gonzenbach. And she, I think, published it in a book called Sicilian Folktales in, of course, the German name for it. I'm just using the translation. Yeah. But that was somewhere in the 19th century. So, so she heard it from someone, in Italy recounting this folktale. And I don't know how many centuries it goes back to. So it's called The Golden Lion. So we run the same theme of golden animals from like the last time we did golden-headed fish. So this time the lion, which is golden.
All right.
So that's what the story is called.
Okay. Thank you. Do you want to take us into it?
Yeah. So we can start on the story.
Yay.
So it's The Golden Lion. So the story goes that there was once a rich merchant who had 3 sons, and when they grew up, the eldest son said to him that he would like to travel and see the world. And so the father wanted to go, have this for his son. So he ordered a beautiful ship to be ready and set sail, and the eldest son sailed away in it. And after a few weeks, this vessel reached a large port town and kind of cast anchor and stopped there. And the son went on shore to kind of see what the town was like and what kingdom he had reached. And as soon as he went into town, he saw a large notice on a board that said that any man who could find the king's daughter within 8 days, he could marry her. But if he tried and failed, he would lose his head. And the young man read this and thought, well, I've got 8 days. That shouldn't be a difficult matter. And he went to the presence of the king, and he told him what he wanted to do, that he wished to try and seek the princess. Right. So the king told him that these are the terms. You have 8 days, of course, and you have the entire palace that you can search in. But you must remember that failure will cost you your head. And so the young man went in, the doors were thrown open, and he was given food and drink and all the luxuries you can enjoy in a palace. And once he'd eaten, he began to look for the princess. And he looked in every corner, every room, every chest, and every cupboard. I looked for, all kinds of doors and windows that would open into other secret rooms or anything like that. And she was not in any of them. And after 8 days, he gave up and, his head was cut off. And all this time, his father and 2 brothers were quite anxious that they hadn't heard anything from him. So finally, the second son said, I can't take this any longer. I would like to go in search of my brother. So he went to his father and said, would you please arrange for a large ship and some money so I can go and look for my brother? So another ship was fitted out, and this young man sailed away. And as chance would have it, he was blown by the wind into the same harbor where his brother had landed. And he saw his brother's ship lying at anchor, and he thought, okay, so this is where he is, and he must be in the town. He can't be far off. So he went on shore, and his eye caught the same notice board that his brother had seen about, seeking the princess. And he thought to himself that he must have taken it on himself to find the princess, and he certainly seems to have lost. So I must try and seek him as well as her. And so he went to the king. The same thing happened again. 8 days he was in the palace. He looked for, for the princess, and his search was just futile. That he couldn't find anything that his brother already hadn't seen. So there he was at the end of 8 days. He failed and he lost his head. So now the youngest son was at home, and after a few days, he also thought of the same thing, and he asked his father for a ship. He set out, and the ship was blown by the wind exactly to the same harbor as before. And he got on shore, he saw the notice, and he thought of the same thing. I said, it seems like my 2 brothers have lost this quest, but in spite of that, I think I should try my luck. And this time, on his way to the palace, he met an old woman who stopped him and begged for money. And he turned her away and he said, leave me in peace, old woman. And the old woman turned and said, well, you're such a handsome young man. You should surely not refuse an old woman a few pence. And he was already troubled, in a hurry, and he said, I'm telling you, please leave me alone. And the old woman noticed this and she said, is there some kind of trouble? Because if you tell me what it is, I can help you. And then, he told her about how his brothers had set out for these quests, seemingly, and how he now had set his heart on finding the king's daughter. And to this, the old woman replied, well, I can manage that for you quite easily, as long as you have enough money. And to that, the young man said, well, I have plenty of money. You don't have to worry about that. And she said, well, then you take the money to a goldsmith and get him to make a golden lion for you. It has to have eyes of crystal. And inside the lion, there must be something that plays tunes. And when this is ready, bring it to me. So the young man did as he was told. He got the golden lion made and he brought it to the old woman, and she hid the young man inside the lion. And she brought that lion to the king. And the king was just so delighted with that lion. It is this beautiful, magnificent golden lion which plays tunes. He wanted to buy it. But she said, well, it doesn't belong to me, and my master won't part from it at any price. So I'm sorry, but I'll have to take it back. So the king then said, well, could you at least leave it with me for a few days? Because I would love to show this to my daughter. And the old woman thought about it and said, well, I can do that, but I must have it back tomorrow. So you can keep it for a day. So the king was kind of suspicious. So he watched her till she was out of sight, made sure that she wasn't spying on him. And then he straight away took the golden lion into his room. And he lifted some loose boards on the floor. And there was a staircase. He went down till he reached a door at the foot of the stairs. He unlocked this, and there was a narrow passage, and there was another door. And the young man sitting inside the golden lion was keeping count of everything. He was kind of marking the route, so to speak. And he counted that there were 7 doors in all. And all of them had been unlocked by the king, and he entered a beautiful large hall. And the princess was sitting here, and she was, she was sitting with 11 other maidens, 11 of her friends. And all these 12 girls wore the same exact clothes. And they looked exactly like each other. And at this moment, the young man thought, well, this is just tough luck, because supposing I find my way back here again, there's no way I can tell which one is the princess. And he tried hard to kind of stare at every one of them to see if there's any difference. And meanwhile, the princess was so delighted with this lion, she clapped her hands and told the king, would you let us, keep this beautiful, beautiful animal for tonight? And, this is just so lovely to have it. And the king couldn't stay there for long. So he handed over the lion, and, then he left. And eventually by night, they all got sleepy. And the maidens, left to go to bed. The princess took the lion into her own room, and she laid it on the floor. She was just beginning to go to sleep when she heard a voice, and this made her jump. She wasn't sure where the voice was coming from. And the voice said, oh, beautiful princess, if you only knew what I had to go through to find you. And she jumped out of bed screaming. And, she kept screaming that the lion. And her friends thought that she was having a nightmare, so nobody bothered to get up and find out. And this voice continued speaking and said, please don't fear me. I'm the son of a rich merchant. And above all things, I just desire to marry you. And in order to get to you, I hid myself in this golden lion. And the princess heard this and she said, well, what use is that? Because when you actually come down to with your quest, you cannot pick me out from my friends. You will still fail. And the young man said, well, for that, I would love for you to help me. And I've done so much to find you. You might do just this one thing for me. And so she said, okay, on the 8th day, when you come to look for me, I will tie a white sash around my waist, and you will be able to tell me apart from that. So the next morning, the king came back to fetch the lion because the old woman was already waiting at the gate. And the old woman took the lion back, and she let the young man out once they were out of, safe, out of view. And this young man went back to the king and told him that, he wanted to go on a quest and find the princess. And the king said, very well. He went through the drill of telling him the rules. And the young man remained in the castle for about, 7 days, pretending to search, just enjoying all the beautiful things around him. And on the 8th day, he went into the room where the king was sitting. And he told the king, please take up the floor, and I would like to have a closer look at the floor. And now the king was uncomfortable. So he was like, what do you want to look at the floor for? But because everyone else was in the room, was watching, his servants and his courtiers were watching, he didn't like to make any more objections. So he kind of ordered the floor to be taken up. And the young man knew where the loose floorboards were. He went straight for them, removed the floorboards, got into the staircase. And then when he came to the door, he turned and asked the key to be brought. So now the king was forced to kind of unlock the door, and the next and the next, and there were like 7 doors that had to be unlocked. And finally they entered into the hall where the 12 maidens were standing in a row. And no one could tell them apart. And as he was looking to see which one of them was the princess, the real princess quietly drew a white sash from her pocket and slipped it around her waist. And the young man pointed out to her and said, this is the princess, and I claim her for my wife. So the king had no choice but to, command a wedding to be held. And after 8 days, the couple said farewell to the king, and they set sail for the young man's country, carrying with them a shipload of treasures as the princess's dowry. And of course, the young man didn't forget the old woman who'd helped him, so they gave her enough money so she could be comfortable till the end of her days. So that's the story.
Yay! Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I really enjoy that story. I mean, I liked it even more the second time after we had a chance to sort of brainstorm through it.
Mm-hmm.
But let me start by asking my usual question, which is where do you enter this story?
So two things really here is that the first one wasn't really obvious to me until you pointed it out later during our brainstorm, is that the fact the title itself said Golden Lion. Of course, there was this faint resemblance to the golden-headed fish, and it was an animal story. So I was curious initially, but I think the other reason was also that I've been having a series of dreams of lions and tigers, so somewhere in the back of my mind, I think that symbol just leapt out, and I kind of held on to that. But I wasn't very sure about that until later. So that was one. And the second reason is I was just stunned as I was reading through the story as to how similar it was in its kind of the overall arc and structure to something we've already done before. Is the story called the Swan Maidens, and let me put a link of that a little later. But what we had there was a hunter who hunted in the forest at night, typically a duck hunter, and he encounters these swan maidens who are exactly identical, right? And he kind of captures one of them, marries her, and then he has to go on a quest to find her, right? So that's the outline of that story. It was just so similar to that story arc. Of course, changes in that. But so I was fascinated by what the story was trying to tell in its differences. So we start with the quest right away in the story, instead of the quest coming almost at the end of the other story, right? So, and then there are these similar thing where he has to enter the king's palace and kind of openly take up the challenge from him, and the final quest is, of course, to identify which one is the princess. So there were these things that almost like the same story, just told in a different language and then a kind of different flavor. So that intrigued me, and I was, and I thought, and I think we discussed this as well, that it would be great to kind of go back and compare what we found there and what we find here as a way of fine-tuning our own insight that we get from these kinds of symbols.
I love that.
That's what I loved about that.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so let me jump into a bit of my notes, and just so I ask you in front of everyone to make sure you don't squirrel away. I would like to request that you stay on screen,
Sure.
and we can go back and forth, and maybe use this session to do a little bit of comparison and drawing the golden thread across some of these stories about inner masculine and inner feminine integration. So stay with me and let me jump in. And for those of you who may be new or who have not, listened to even the last couple months of fairy tale sessions, let alone the entirety of the last 45 sessions, right, since last March. I'll just give a bit of a quick thumbnail intro into this whole fairy tale dream thing. And the two things I'll talk about are how we read these fairy tales and myths and dreams, and then what is a really quick little thing on what is inner masculine and inner feminine, and what do we mean when we talk about that, and then we'll dive into the meaty parts of the story itself. So when we do our healing work, when we do our bliss work, actually, all of the stuff that we do, we will tend to come across in advisees dreams, myths will come up, fairy tales will come up, events that happen in the external outer world that are a little bit too, coy, a little bit too cute and specific to be just brushed off as random sort of happenings, right? And then we'll try to read them, right? And the idea here is that in order to read a dream, read a fairy tale, read anything from this mythopoetic lens, is what we call it, is that you basically take, in this case, a fairy tale like this, and then you regard the entire cast of characters, all the major elements, as each one symbolizing a separate and distinct part of your own inner self. Okay, so in this story, the father is you, the three sons are you, the third son's definitely you, the princess is you, the old lady is you, the king is you, and the golden lion is definitely you. But they're different parts of you. It's like saying, okay, these are my eyes, these are my ears, these are my heart, liver, lungs, right? And then you hit the play button, you watch this video story unspool. And then what you're looking for is you're looking for who is doing what to whom, who is being suppressed, who is being, a jerk. What are the physics of the action of the narrative? And then the message or the insight is coded in that. There are other things that we've said in past sessions where it's like, and you can read this and then proceed to read it allegorically, where it's like the moral of the story is don't be a jerk and be nice to animals, right? Be nice and listen to old ladies when they come up to you. Or you could read it symbolically, which is, well, the old lady is you, right? The animals are you. And so what symbolically is the nature of, what, it's not what is this thing trying to fear, threat, and control us into doing from a moralistic standpoint, allegorical standpoint, but symbolically, like what is the diorama of all of this revealing to us? What insight do we pull from it instead of, what lesson is kind of being hammered into us, right? It's like the difference between the two Latin, I mean, they're not Latin, they're English words too. The word instruct, right, versus the word educate, right? So the Latin word instruct means to, put structure in, which is a very, if you're my student and I'm tasked with putting structure in you, then I need to find my stick to sort of beat it into you, right? Whereas education is educare, right? To ducare is to lead and is out. And the point of education is not to put something into you, but to draw something out of you, right? And so when we read things, not allegorically, which is to put structure in, but symbolically, we look at the symbol, we look at the structure, the archetype of what's going on, and then it draws certain things out of us. We're like, that is me, and this is a different part of me. And I realize, I could be doing things differently. So that's the first thing. So how we read dreams, and I've repeated this, numerous times, but just for everyone's convenience. And then the second thing is to talk about this concept of inner feminine and inner masculine. So when we look at dreams and fairy tales, we'll often see feminine figures, so princesses, cats, snakes, chalices, cauldrons, grails, and then we'll see sort of masculine seeming, traditionally considered masculine seeming figures, kings, princes, princesses, dogs, wolves, foxes, swords, sticks, bats, right? Towers, although towers are a kind of mix of inner feminine and inner masculine. And so what is this idea? The idea here is that within each of us, regardless of our external gender, right, our chosen, declared, our sort of what gender we consider ourselves to be, we also have within us a principle that you don't have to, but you can call inner masculine, and a principle that you can call inner feminine. And within us, right, regardless of whether we're a man, a woman, non-binary, whatever it is, within us as humans, we have these two principles within us. Just like regardless of gender, I have a left side and a right side. I have, two eyes. I have two ears, right? I have an upper body and a lower body. And in exactly the same way, we each have masculine and feminine forces and functions, principles within us. And the traditional role, right, of the masculine force within us, regardless of our external gender, is that of protection, boundary control, and then the third is sort of manifestation, right, sort of acting on the physical world around us to sort of make things happen, to sort of execute the vision that has been given. The role of the inner feminine, traditionally, right, in these stories and myths, is nourishment, nurturing, right, and then also vision. Right, so the feminine is the holder of vision. Right, the Greek muses are all feminine. All 9 of them are feminine. They're goddesses. They're the daughters of the 3 graces, and the 3 graces are feminine. And the 3 graces are the daughters of the Great Mother, and the Great Mother obviously is feminine as well. So all inspiration, all vision comes from the feminine. Right, and the sort of metaphorical feeling we have is that, she is the one that will like look at a mountainside. And see a ledge there, and she'll say, okay, there, we want to clear that area, and it's about this wide, and that's where we want it. And she's like, go. And the inner masculine goes and clears the area, protects it, puts up fences. And then once he's there, he's like, whoa, this is actually good. It's like we're backed by a mountain, we're protected. There's actually a stream flowing through. We can look down across the valley. Yeah, this is a great spot. And she's like, yeah, great. Thanks for keeping up. And I love you. Good job. And now, like, what are we going to do is it going to be a ranch? Is it going to be a dairy farm? Is it going to be a factory? What is it going to be? She holds the vision. And the role of the inner masculine is to provide protection and then outbound manifestation, right? Because to receive vision, you need to basically relax and surrender in sacred space to open up that very delicate deep space radar receiver, right? To get the deep space signal of like, what the heck we're even supposed to be doing here on this earth in this life. But when you're doing that and looking upward, you're very vulnerable. So there's an element that needs to circle around you, right, to protect you while you're doing that. And then you get the message, and then you're like, okay, hey, folks, come around. We got the blueprint now. We know what we're doing. And then, sort of the facilitator, the implementer of all that is what we have been calling the inner masculine. Now, again, this is not a sort of a gendered political thing where it's like men should do this, women should do that. These are principles within you. And you don't have to call them masculine, feminine. You can call it yin yang. So the yang is the masculine, the yin is the feminine. You can call it light, dark, left, right. You can call it all these different principles. Being more of a politically correct San Francisco, California, West Coaster myself, I tend to prefer the more politically correct terms. But then it's like when you encounter these elements in dreams and fairy tales, the inner masculine tends to show up as like the prince and the king. And the inner feminine tends to show up as this like Sicilian princess. And in dreams, when, advisees and clients bring us dreams, it's like we're reading them and it's like, okay, it looks like this, it looks like that. And, not to impose, but here's what we're thinking. What do you think? And they're like, oh yeah, that's absolutely right on. So, I've probably read like 8,000 to 10,000 dreams at this point, of in one form or another over the past several years. And this pattern just kind of emerges where it's like, it just shows up in this way. So as a shorthand, just to kind of get on with it, we kind of regress to calling them inner masculine and inner feminine. But anytime you're like, well, I don't know if I agree with that. It's like, we're not talking about outer society, right? We're not talking about outer society. We're talking about every human being has these two principles. Call them what you will. But we do look to see what is going on with the two principles. Because what we see here then, regardless of what you call them, is that they are opposite, but they long for reconciliation, reunion, and reintegration, right? And in a fairy tale, when the princess and the prince get married, and it's not the false bride, it's not the false evil, whatever, but it's like the correct prince and princess get married. They say they live happily ever after, and they are, it's like, they go to the kingdom and they're the king and queen now, and they are fruitful and they multiply. Now that, again, is not two human beings, right, in the outer world. Those are two principles within you. And when these two principles finally come into wholeness and reconciliation, you have happily ever after, which does not necessarily mean biological children. It means the procreativity, generativity in you. That means you stop following sort of the zombie path of just money and prestige for a job you hate, and you start realigning your life to go after whatever it is you want, right? Whatever it is you want. Your bliss, your procreativity, your productivity, your generativity as an artist, or whatever it is you want. So then, in each of these stories, right, we get a kind of diorama of different kinds of cases of when the inner masculine and inner feminine try to find each other and come together. Okay. And what's fascinating about this story is that it follows a lot of the physics we've seen in the fairy tales we've read. There are three brothers. The first two fail. The third dumbling brother comes along, gets advice and takes it from the crone inner feminine and succeeds. He refuses the feminine twice, and the third time he accepts. And then he comes up with this gambit, guided by the crone, by the wisdom inner feminine, and then proceeds to win the princess, right? And then gets the help from the princess as well. So she's not just, this passive sort of object or trophy. It's like, she encounters him. There is a reconciliation scene where he's like, I've done all this, guided by you, because there's only one inner feminine, right? The crone is the inner feminine, and the princess is the inner feminine. Guided by you, now I need your help with this, and then she concurs, right? And then she helps him with the white sash to identify, and then they come together and happily ever after. Now the thing is, these fairy tales can be thought of as archetypal collective dreams. And any given fairy tale that survives through hundreds of years, in some cases thousands of years, through the oral tradition and then in print tradition, and then these tales which actually show up in live things. I mean, it's 2021 now, right? And we're doing these sessions, and the story, very obscure, Sicilian, this like sort of, like of global, it's Northern Europe, and then it's Southern Europe, and then it's not even Italy, it's like Southern Italy. So like some very obscure kind of branch, offshoot of tradition. And here we see yet another story of inner masculine and inner feminine coming together. And so the question is, it's just like any organ that has survived, millenniums of evolution. You ask yourself, why did this story, why isn't the Princess and Frog good enough? Why isn't Snow White good enough? Why isn't Cinderella good enough, right? Because in each of these, we have the inner masculine, inner feminine coming together. Hooray, everything's fine, and you have your happily ever after. Well, one of the reasons is that in each one of these, there's a slightly different detail that's zoomed into that reveals a different aspect of the general case of the inner masculine and inner feminine coming together. And that's why each one of these stories is interesting. When we read this story, I was like, oh, this is simple. Prince and princess came together. There was a little bit of a, there's some sort of symbolism with the number 12, with the number 8, with the number 3. That's fine. I mean, we can do that in a session like this, but I'm not sure, y'all would be interested in the numerical aspects of things. That's a little bit almost too nerdy, right? And I'm just like, well, they came together and that's fine. It's a relatively short story. I'm not sure how interesting this would be. And then we zoom in into the detail, the actual gambit and mechanism of how the two come together. And then we get this extra insight of the role of delight, which I'll get to. But just to zoom out for a second, each one of these masculine, feminine, reunion, reintegration stories gives a slightly different mechanism for the trick, the crux, the key for how the two come together. So for instance, we haven't told these stories in a public forum, but they're the ones I tend to know better. So Snow White from Grimm Brothers, right? The key there is that he jostled the coffin and released the poison apple from her throat. So the action here of full reconciliation is the masculine coming in and re-enabling, unblocking the power of voice, right? From the poison wisdom and re-empowering, bringing the feminine back to full power. Cinderella is the role of grief on the feminine side, but on the masculine side, it really is sort of the power of listening to the birds of spirit, right? When they said it's the false bride and look at the blood leaking out of the shoe. In the Fisher King, right? Parzival from the Arthurian cycle in the Celtic tradition. The key to attaining the Grail, right, was to ask the healing question, right? What is the matter here? What ails the king, right? So in each of these, the high-level action is that the masculine and feminine come together, but the detail isn't how, right? And in each one of these stories, it gives a different aspect of how. And, Gary, I was thinking the other day, it would be an interesting almost book of essays, right, to have at some point, where, the theme overall would be this sort of integration of masculine and feminine within you. And then each story basically brings out a different aspect of it, right? So that at the end, you have this list of like, for the inner masculine and feminine come together, like this list of 12 different things needs to be done or could be done. It's like reading through a book of medical cases, right? Here are all the different ways that, the ear can have issues and be healed. So here, let's go through the action of the story. Now, remember, all the masculine figures in this story are different aspects of the single inner masculine, and all the feminine are different aspects of the inner feminine. So here, you have three brothers. The first two in any sort of threesome of brothers in these stories. The first two typically represent sort of prestige, status, and then wealth, right? Sort of material comfort, greed. And then the third brother is like the dummy brother, right? Who isn't good for anything. He's made fun of. I mean, we've seen this time and again in all the stories we've done, even in this series. And so the first two brothers fail. And then the third brother comes along. And an interesting transposition here is that he encounters the wisdom inner feminine, the old woman, the crone, the Baba Yaga. And here he refuses the help of the feminine twice. And then the third time he relents and listens to her. Now, in a typical sort of Northern European story, each of the brothers would encounter the Baba Yaga, refuse. And then the third brother would come, and he is the one who's actually nice to the old lady. He is the one who actually spares the animal that he hunts, right? And then he gets these sort of extra prizes. But here, we don't have that, and it's an interesting sort of little difference here, where all the first two failures come through the third brother. And the only reason I'm bringing that up is that when you read it through, it's like, okay, if you take it too literally, it's like, okay, so the third brother is messing up too. It doesn't make as much sense. But when you pull back and use the mythopoetic lens of looking at it, these are aspects of the inner masculine, right? So all three brothers are your inner masculine. All three tries of the third brother are your singular inner masculine. It's just like in the previous story, the golden-headed fish, right? Where the prince is like the 190th man to marry the princess. Or there have been, so he's the 191st, right? And the point is all 190 men are also aspects of your own inner masculine, right? They're all previous attempts, previous circumambulations that you've gone through. Where you've learned a little more each time, you've come to additional insight each time, and now the 191st time, you break all the way through, right? We're here the third time, and the number 3, we've seen this before, is a symbol of the completion of a cycle, right? So we count completions in threes: ABC, 1, 2, 3, beginning, middle, end. Caterpillar, cocoon, butterfly. There's obviously more that happens after the butterfly, but we tend to count, sort of cycles in threes. So the idea here is that when you complete a 3 of something, it's the symbol of a completion of a cycle. It does not mean that things literally have to, it's not like, oh, I have to do it 3 times and the third time will be the charm, right? It's that 3 is less a sort of linear, literal numbering and more of an archetypal mythopoetic symbol. It's like, it will be done when it's done. And here we're seeing the third brother, because he's the third brother, completes, and he's the one that's going to make it all the way through.
It was an interesting kind of comparison that I noted when I was reading this. Yeah. It's like I said, in a lot of fairy tales where there are 3 brothers, you notice very starkly, even in the story that we did recently, The Princess on the Glass Hill, the Norwegian tale, the three brothers, the first two attempt to do something, and in the story that they clearly bully the third brother, who is a bit of a simple guy. And the way they mock and shame and bully the third brother, that gives you the clue that the first two brothers are like, prestige, all about prestige, money, and all of that, and the profane. And the third brother is in the realm of the sacred. But in this story, the way the three brothers are put in, to me, was kind of, it felt more of reiteration of what we learned last week when you say the prince was the 191st guy to marry the princess, and then he succeeds in finally breaking her curse. So basically the 190, where did the 190 versions of the masculine go wrong, and why is it that this guy succeeded? I mean, you could try and figure out all kinds of reasons attributed to him, but the fact remains that it's just that he went through the circumambulation so many times, and he was just ripe and ready for it, right?
Well, to be fair, I mean, in the golden-headed fish story, the action is very specifically laid out, right? It's like the Arab assistant, who was the golden-headed fish in disguise, came out and cut down, right, the snake that came out and killed the other 190 husbands, right, previous husbands. So the beauty is, it's sort of like, oh, so to really get through, I need the Arab by my side, right? And then you start tracing back, well, how do I get the Arab to my side? It's like, when I see the golden fish, right, I need to sort of deal with it in good faith, and do only the thing that I'm supposed to do with it. All these things we said in the story analysis last week. And then even there's insight into, well, then how do I get the golden fish? It's like, when you have stopped doing things for prestige, validation, the 100 days have passed, there's no hope of getting anything from your dad now if you catch this fish. You throw the net out one more time for no good reason.
And the kind of detail there is that even in the story, the third brother says, while my two brothers have left and they disappeared, they took up the quest of finding the princess and probably lost their heads.
Right.
I'll try my luck again one more time anyway.
Right. Right.
It's kind of that, I'm going to lose my head most likely, but I'm going to try my luck anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And so here, let me move to the golden lion. So a couple things here. In mythology and fairy tales, a lion is a very sort of specific symbol. It's a symbol, to me, of intrinsic inner masculine, inner feminine integration. And the reason for that is, a cat is typically in mythopoetics, a sign of the feminine, right? So, feminine body, because it's an animal, so it's like neck down, like the fish. Any animal that shows up is a symbol of not intellect, not spirit, but of body and soul. So your instinct, your intuition, your physicality, your sensuality, your sexuality. And then at this level, there's masculine and feminine principles as well. So a cat is a symbol of inner feminine instinct, intuition, sensuality, sexuality, all of that. So a lion is a cat, but a male lion is a male cat, and specifically a male lion with his mane is typically a symbol of a sun. It's a solar kind of symbol. Okay, this is across many different traditions. And so here it is a powerfully solar, masculine, feminine entity, which means, right, the inner masculine and inner feminine are intrinsically integrated. You can't have one without the other. You can't have a lion, right, that is not a cat, and you can't have a male lion that's not male. Right, so you can't separate the two, and there are other sort of very rare specific symbols of this. So a tower, for instance, is another example of this. The outside of the tower is a very phallic kind of masculine thing, but the inside of the tower, so it's not an obelisk, right? The inside is hollow, where you can like go up the stairs to the top of the tower. Um, the inside is feminine because it's a container, it's womb-like, it's a sheath, right? But if you have this tower, the masculine and the feminine, they're literally like two sides of the same coin. You can't separate the two. You can't have one without the other. They are intrinsically, categorically joined and reconciled, fully integrated, to where you couldn't even surgically separate them if you wanted to, right? And that's why in a lot of these fairy tales, the princess, the sort of thing you're getting to sort of have inner masculine and feminine, is trapped at the top of the tower. You need to get through and achieve this level of reconciliation in order to get the princess, right? So, so if they seem separate, it is an illusion. It's a dance, right? The two are within you, and you are the sort of one person, right? So the prince and the princess, the masculine and feminine, may be miscoordinated, where they're working at cross purposes because they're not aware of each other. They've forgotten that they're two sides of the same coin. But you cannot actually remove one as a separate thing from the other, right? So as a human being, it's like you may have great vision, but if you're inner masculine suppressed, you don't have a lot of sort of implementation power, right? You have great vision, but people walk all over you. You can't say no to people, right? So you end up implementing other people's visions because your inner masculine is not strong. You could have the opposite, where your inner masculine is very strong, but your inner feminine is suppressed and weak. And you can do anything, but you have no vision. And I mean, that's not the only aspect, but there are. I mean, when we do retreats, like the entirety of day 2 is basically focused on this question for each of the participants. So this is the symbol of the lion, and then a golden lion, right? As we know, gold is a symbol of insight from several stories that we've already done. So this inner masculine, inner feminine reconciliation and reunion is the insight of the story. And it involves vision with the crystal eyes, okay? And it involves this musical element, which we'll get to as well. The lion is also, in the alchemical system, a symbol of desire, right? Your raging lion is a symbol of desire. And the details here are what really sort of give the message. Here in the story, we're not talking about a real life living lion, where if you had that in the story, it would bring up sort of the fear of predator-prey, right? Which is an aspect of sexual romantic desire as well. There's a predator-prey mode of desire. But here, there is a different aspect brought forward. And the most interesting detail of this golden lion is the musical aspect, right? The lion has a music box or something that creates these tunes within it. And this is like the defining characteristic of this lion. So it is desire, but it's not the predator-prey mode of desire. It is this musical aspect of desire. And the musical aspect of desire is what I have sort of in our brainstorm, we've chosen to call this aspect of delight. But so specifically with regard to this desire element, which is not just masculine, it's masculine and feminine together. Not the predator-prey archetype or pattern, but the archetype or pattern of delight. And this is the key in this story. Whereas before in the other stories, there were different mechanisms and different keys. In this story, the key gambit is delight. The delight side of desire, not the predator side of desire. So the guidance of the old woman is to spend your money, ego power, to pour your ego power into the development of your desire under the sort of narrative and framework of delight. It is not a real life lion. It's a golden lion, which then plays music. And this delight element is the part that gets it past the king, all the way down past all 7, right, the full perfection, all 7, into the realm of the 12 maidens. And we're not going to go into all the sort of side sort of details, but 12 is a solar number, right? Jesus had apostles, Odysseus battled 12 suitors, and it's a solar number. There are 12 months in the solar calendar. So whenever you see 12, you know you're in a sort of masculine. There's a masculine element there, and here again, it's the realm, the sort of inner sanctum of the inner feminine. This is like the bedroom of the princess in the Frog King story. So we're here in her bedroom with the 12 masculine, maidens feminine, right? So this fully integrated inner masculine, inner feminine lion, through the mechanism of delight, not fear, threat, and control, not predator prey, but through delight, is then led into the inner sanctum to meet its mirror, which is the 12 maidens, which is another form of inner masculine, inner feminine full integration, because they're feminine maidens and they're 12 masculine, and you can't separate the two, right? You can't separate the two.
I love how this point comes through so strongly in the story, because I'm reminded of what you had said in the Swan Maidens, when we were decoding that story. And you had decided to call that session the hide and seek nature of healing, right? And it said that the inner masculine and the feminine are not really separate, not really moved apart. They're not thrown apart or anything. They're always together. It's just that the seeming misalignment or miscoordination is a part of the whole game of circumambulation. So it seems like they're playing hide and seek more than anything else, right? So it's
right.
And the integrity wasn't really that strong. I mean, it didn't come through that strongly in that story, but I love how that it's emphasized in so many different ways in this one.
Yeah, I mean, it really, okay, not to completely derail, right, but I'll just say this. This whole motif, this pattern of hide and seek, it's really the core of everything, right? When we talk about in the Tao Te Ching talk, where we talk about like the nature of reality and the role of naming and the Upanishads, there is only one thing that exists, right? And it is the sort of hide and seek of the one thing. When you name it something, that makes you believe that there are actually two things or more than one thing, right? In the Chinese, Wan Wu, 10,000 things, right? So it's not just an inner masculine, inner feminine, but all aspects of existence, right, have different levels of hide and seek. So you can almost go back to the 7 chakras talk from several months ago and say that here the hide and seek is at chakra 2, which is inner masculine or feminine, the two coming together and desire. But as you move up the sort of chakra sort of ladder, there are other levels of hide and seek as well. So from the heart upward, right, when you start unconditional love, unconditional voice, unconditional vision, unconditional existence at the crown chakra, you start to realize that not just that, the inner masculine and inner feminine are actually one, but that all different parts of you are one, that like people on the outside are also you. And I think I mentioned Schopenhauer last week. So basically that idea of when it is this idea from Schopenhauer that, for instance, when you are in a very emotionally charged crisis situation, right, and you run into a burning building to like save someone, right, and you are more essential, right? It's like it's this old man, right, and you're the one who's like the soldier that is needed to like defend everyone, but you risk your life anyway to save this, like, that's this, in the profane you could argue, it's expendable, right? And you risk everything to save this person anyway. And afterwards in the interview, when I was like, why did you do that? The person will say something often like, something came over me and I just knew that if he died, that I just would not be able to live another day. That his death was my death. So when I'm saving him, it's not even altruistic. I am literally saving myself. Right? In a case, Schopenhauer there would say, in that specific case, I mean, there are other examples, and when you meditate, when you do all these things, where the veil is lifted and you realize the reality of like, there is no difference between you and me. And of course, one of the aspects of the profane, where we live in a world of names and fear, threat, and control. You're separate from me, and I can be above you, and I don't want to be below you. This feeling of separateness is very clean and clear. And then when you're in the sacred, status starts to fall away. All these things start to fall away, and you feel this deeper sense of, the Latin. I mean, it's community, but the Latin word communitas. Where all these things start to fall away. And you experience this in ritual space and sacred space, right? And so anyway, the point is this lifting of the veil to realize your union, your intrinsic, unchangeable union, right? We can put a veil down and pretend that we're separate, but we're actually not. And if it's upsetting to you to realize that we're not, then put the veil back. That's why we put it there, right? It's like when we're playing a game of Monopoly, right? That board game, and we're playing. It would not be false for me to push back from the table and say, fellas, this money isn't real. This Monopoly money isn't real. That's not an actual hotel. It's just a piece of red plastic, and we're all just playing this pretend game. So I could push back and I could say that, and I wouldn't be false. But there is something of a jerkish, nature of what I'm doing. I'm like being a poor sport. It's like, why did you find yourself at the Monopoly table in the first place? Are you like this victim of circumstances? Like, of course not. Like, you chose to do that. You were like, hey, let's all agree and play this game. And now you're pulling out, and it's like, I mean, you can do that, but we're probably not going to invite you to like Monopoly poker night next week because you're no fun, right? You're not playing along, and you can do it however you want, but it's the nature of the feeling of the state of affairs that we find ourselves in. Okay, so there's a third thing, right, with the lion. So the first thing is the lion is inner masculine, inner feminine integration. The second is lion as a alchemical symbol of desire. And then the third thing is that the lion is also an animal. So it is a symbol of body and intuition, all the things we talked about. And here then, at the level of body intuition, desire, and inner feminine, inner masculine integration, the key thing that defines the function and features of this lion is music. Right? Its ability to have music. So this golden lion that plays music is linked to harmony and embodiment. And when you mix harmony and embodiment, you have dance. So dance is literally, right, the combination, the co-occurrence of harmony and embodiment. And basically what it's saying is, this is the intrinsic sort of power of this inner masculine, inner feminine reintegration. Right? So when you have it, you dance. That's why we dance at weddings, right? And then, but also to lead to this integration, right? This musical harmony that's embodied is absolutely critical. And the reaction of the princess when she sees this lion and the fact that it can make music is, number one, she's delighted, right? And the king brings the lion in because he's delighted. So it's the role of delight, not predator-prey, right? The role of delight in these integrations. And then the next thing she proceeds to do is she and the 12 maidens, like, they're dancing all night with the music coming from this lion. And then she takes the lion into her bedroom, the full sort of, acceptance of it. And then that's when the prince shows up and they have this sort of episode of sort of final sort of mutual agreement and acceptance. And so what I love about this is like this element of delight, just like in a real life romantic relationship, ideally is not about prestige or fear or threat or control, right? It's pure delight. And what is it when I say I'm delighted with something? It's almost like I can't even put words to it. I just like this thing. It's delightful. It's like, in other words, it's for no good reason. It's for no good reason, right? Which is at the desire level of the 3 levels of will, need, want, and desire. Delight is at the level of desire. And so this delight symbolized by the musical line is what leads the man, the prince, to the princess's chamber, to that final sort of deepest level of integration. And it's very telling that it is not predator-prey, also because it's not a result of his cunning. Okay, so this gambit with the lion, with the music added to it, is not his idea. It's what he does under the guidance of the old woman. Right? So in other words, he's not the lion hunting for his prey, the princess. He attains full integration precisely by going to the elder wisdom inner feminine, which is just a different face of the princess, and surrendering to her. Because the role of the inner masculine, as we've said, is implementation. He gets vision from the inner feminine. So when he goes in, when the first 2 brothers go in and they're like, they've got their search warrant and they're taking the place apart, they don't get anywhere. They lose their heads. The transformation is that you stop intellectualizing, you lose your head. Right? And then the 3rd brother comes in, he goes in exactly the opposite direction. He's not using the head, he's using body. The thing is a lion, he's listening to the inner feminine in full surrender. And he doesn't even know the plan. He doesn't know why the line works. She says, now pay all your money to build this line. He says, okay. And now I want you to get in the line. For all he knows, it's like the witch and Hansel and Gretel putting him in the oven. He doesn't know. Like at that point in the story, we don't know. The listeners were like, I don't know. Is she going to cook him? Is she going to throw him into the harbor? What is she going to do? Nobody knows. But he is in full surrender to her. She locks him in the lion. And then she goes forward with her plan. And he doesn't know anything about this plan. He's in full surrender. And it leads straight to the princess. Okay. So it's very telling that the man gets to where he gets by fully surrendering to the wisdom of the old woman. Now, this is all within you. The old woman is within you. The princess is within you. The golden line is within you. It's a shift in your center of gravity to really, consistently look at these things in this way. But it tends to yield a lot of insight. And so because of this element of delight, right, the king's rich. The king doesn't need more gold. It's the music that delights him. Gets drawn into the labyrinth of the castle. Right, so the castle is like a maze that you can't get through, but for the clue, right, CLEW, which was the ball of golden thread that Ariadne gave Theseus to find his way through the labyrinth with this golden thread. So the golden thread that we always talk about is the thread that leads you successfully through the labyrinth. And this golden lion is the golden thread that is put there. And the mechanism here is that the delight, right, that you include in this is the thing that causes the labyrinth to actually draw you in through it. You're not even navigating. You're just this passive passenger at this point. And it draws you right into the center of the labyrinth where the other IMIF 12 maiden symbol is waiting for you. So shepherded by the king directly to the princess, the golden thread leads you to the impossible goal, not through force, not through cunning, but through delight. Through delight. Said another way, delight is this golden thread. And it's exactly consistent with what we say about following your bliss. Do the thing you like for no good reason. And that is the thing that will bring you to the breadcrumb trail of following your bliss. Do the thing you like, not for the things you need, like I need food or else I'll die. Not for the things I want. I want money and prestige, otherwise this childhood wound will continue to fester and hurt. I'm not saying don't do these things, right? But when you're going after your bliss, those are the first two brothers are the ones you don't want to follow, because in story after story, the first two brothers never get anywhere. I mean, it's like, how many civilizations, right? How many world cultures need to like say this before we like realize it? It's the third brother who does stuff for no good reason, doesn't know why, isn't surrender, and then gets led all the way through. And then, so that's in bliss. And then in healing, right? There's something to say about the role of delight in healing as well. It's like discovering the thing about yourself that you like and you love and you delight in for no good reason, right? So, the thing that follows your bliss, for those of you who do healing, what we call a lost board member, right? It's the thing you sort of harshly stuff down because you're afraid of losing, prestige and all these other things. Your parents told you, you shouldn't be a dancer or a poet. You need to be an engineer, right, or a doctor. But the thing when you recover it, right? I'm jumping across, sort of a lot of different processes of healing. But when you finally recover it, there's no reason for you to like this part of yourself. The poet part of you has never paid a bill, has never gotten you a date, right? Has never gotten you anything. And yet here we are. And you're like, I just love this part of me for no good reason. And it's delightful, right? And when you finally let it out, it's the thing that other people find delightful in you because you mirror something in them. But it's discovering the thing about your own inner self also that you like and love and delight in for no good reason. The music within your own self, the music of the spheres, is all related to this Cizeran, this naturally occurring line, golden thread of bliss within you. And these are all different ways of triangulating your way into that place of you within you. People sometimes say, they are. Actually, they say they're delighted when they realize when I give these talks that I'm laughing and sort of giggling and bringing humor. People will say, like, I love how you inject humor into the situation, right? And it's sort of like, it's not this gambit where I'm trying to sort of lighten the mood. It's like, it's because this act of healing all the nerdy things we talk about for no good reason are literally delightful. Right? It's like it's just pure delight. For me personally, it's pure delight to do this work. I don't do this work because it helps people. I don't do it out of compassion. It's a serious, morally heavy thing. I mean, if it's just compassion, there are tons of ways I could like donate to all these causes, right? To sort of send supplies to people in countries who need them, and spend my time. As a doctor, like helping people for free or whatever, right? I mean, if it's just compassion and wanting to help people, this very allegorical sort of aspect of it, you can do in a million different ways. The reason I do it this way is not out of compassion. It's because it's fun, right? This is what I like to do. And then I try to find a way where what I like to do actually helps somebody out there. And then that join, makes it a very robust, resilient, closed circuit. Anyway, that's what we do when we talk about bliss. Trying to find the alignment of the planets within you, where you are able to click into that very resilient, accelerating and thriving closed circuit of bliss between you and the outer world. Let's see, how are we doing on time? Okay, a couple of other points to make here. Is this element of coordination, right? So when we say it's about the golden line and the music and delight, but we're also talking about saying something about the nature of sound and dance and harmony and music. And dance and harmony are, the essence of dance and harmony is coordination. All these parts of you are different parts of you. And the question, of course, is how do you coordinate everything, right? Your liver, your brain, your heart, your lungs, none of these individual pieces of you particularly wants to die, okay? And in order for all of them to live, they need to do everything in harmony, right? To a rhythm, to a homeostatic rhythm within your body. so that the whole you can live and thrive. If they're fighting with each other, if the liver is like suppressing the lungs, and the brain is like, no, I'm in charge here. You guys are just this donkey that I'm riding through life, and you don't have a say. You're going to have all kinds of issues. So these, the sons are looking for the princess. The king is looking for the right person to bring to the princess. He's actively, tricking. He's actively putting the bait out to try to find the right person to bring in. And they're all looking to integrate with perfect synchronization, ideally, right? And this golden lion, this gambit, it's like the Maltese falcon, the sort of key MacGuffin or football, right, of the entire story, is the key insight that leads to happily ever after. It is the symbol of happily ever after. And whatever the symbol is, gives you the key message or insight of the story. And it is this thing of inherent inner masculine and feminine integration, desire in the form of delight, not predator-prey, which is the other aspect of line. And the third is the role of music and embodiment, and then also coordination. Said another way, and these are not like truths or wisdoms that I'm like bestowing on you. I'm getting these nuggets from the story, right? So you're like, Artie, how do you know? It's like, I don't know any of this. I'm reading this from the story, right? So if any of this is particularly insightful, it's not that I've known all this for like whatever 46 weeks and I've been holding out on you. It's that I'm reading the story. I'm reading these insights directly from the interpretation of the story. So the basis of coordination between inner masculine and inner feminine is delight, rhythm, music/harmony, embodiment, and dance. It's not intellectual. And when you miss this point, like the two older brothers, you get your head cut off. Right? Because you're using your head when it's your body, and then when you fail, your head gets cut off. Okay. I've lost your sound. Oh.
Sorry, I think I just muted myself.
Say again.
Yeah. So this was a particularly helpful comment when we were discussing this the first time, and you said coordination, and I have to say, for me, the connotation of it instantly was very intellectual, right? All these different people, different aspects, different people in the team have to coordinate with each other. They have to work together in harmony. And, it's almost embarrassing to say this, but even the word harmony kind of brought in a very intellectual, planned strategically kind of thought out and executed function that requires a lot of thinking and planning. And then the moment you said, okay, music and dance, and I was thinking of hand and leg coordination and hand and eye coordination and all of those things, and I was like, this is here, this is not here. So you just know it when you know it, and when everything is coordinated, it's in the body and you feel it. It's not something to be planned or strategized. So and that insight is just, when you apply that to inner masculine and feminine coordination, it's like when they're playing hide and seek to find each other, but there comes a moment when they kind of come face to face in that whole process of hide and seek. It immediately starts to look like a coordinated dance, right? And it's effortless. And knowing that is assuring in a great way, because again, it's not the pressure of trying to coordinate your inner masculine and the feminine.
Right.
Kind of when it happens, it just flows out.
Right. But you may have to go through 190 circumambulations before you get
you have to get your head
you may have to get your head cut off 190 times, or bitten by the snake of feminine
Yeah.
embodied wisdom, right? The snake,
Yeah.
the black
Yeah.
snake, before you finally get to that point. And
Yeah.
it's hard to intellectualize yourself and future trip yourself to that point if your body isn't there yet.
Yeah. Yeah. But
I
that
mean,
that
let's just,
moment I said it was like
yeah,
an instant pressure release. Like, ah, okay, I get this. This is the body, not the head.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's why, that's why even for these sessions, I think sometimes, should I invite a friend or two to do embodiment exercises, yoga or breath work or whatever in these sacred space exercises. I mean, if you all have any ideas, feel free to email me. I'd love to hear your feedback. I mean, we're kind of on a tear with this fairy tale thing, so I want to keep going. But it is something that has like crossed my mind multiple times. Because let's like zoom out for a moment. Okay. Let's be clear. Like, we're both highly heady, intellectualized nerds,
Yeah.
right? Even in terms of upbringing, your family is like Brahmin class. I'm like Chinese scholar, sort of professor class. A little bit of swashbuckling merchant in there for good measure, but basically we're both nerds. We're very much in our heads. We're doing these sacred space sessions, which I think feels good for everyone at this body level. But we're doing it in this, in the middle of pandemic. We're not in person. We're literally in this disembodied medium where we're just, heads and squares looking at each other. And so it's a very moving thing for, intellectual nerds like us to be like groping and trying to sort of follow mythopoetics as opposed to sort of Cartesian intellect, right? Through these archetypal stories. And the stories, one after another, keep pointing us back to the body, to the body, to the body. And for me, I need, 190 goes is not, I need like 19,000 goes before I finally sort of get past, the sort of super sharpened surgical sort of swords of my intellect to actually like sit the heck down and like, do 10 minutes of yoga, Yeah. So, so that's like how I would characterize the two of us in doing all of this. And it is a constant, I don't want to say temptation because I don't think it's bad, right? But it's this constant reflex, especially in the online dominated sort of reality of our modern world, where it's like, in order to not do it because it's uncomfortable, because like putting your body out there is uncomfortable if you're not used to it. It's much more soothing to just talk about it. It's much more soothing to just talk. And I'm not talking about people watching. I'm not even talking about you. I'm talking about me. It's like much more soothing, and I'm a good talker. I can say pretty words. So I get validated for just talking about it. I get like, a rush of like, approval. Everyone says thank you. And in the end of the day, it's like, it's still this like next step of like, oh yeah, when the camera's off, everything, no one's looking. It's like, there's still embodiment that has been requested by this part of me, because this golden lion story is as valid as me having a dream about the golden lion. To me, I mean, it's possibly true for all of you as well, right? But I'll let you make your own sovereign decision on that. But for me, it's like every story that comes up, every dream that an advisee brings to me is eligible for a level of equivalency as if I had that dream myself. Because if it comes up here, I mean, life is but a dream, right? So everything that's happening now, you can also read as a dream. Every story that you come into, you can log as a dream and then process it as such if you want. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Embodiment keeps coming back again and again and again, and I'm like, all right. Like, yeah, stuff and do more, right?
Yeah.
What else?
I also thought it was again going back to the comparison between the Swan Maiden story and this one. I found it really interesting that in the Swan Maiden story we have this duck hunter at the beginning, right? And the way you interpreted that was that here's this person who knows to be comfortable in the deep dark forest and goes there to hunt at night. And this is in the realm of the feminine, right? And is perfectly comfortable, and he even gets nourishment at night in this deep dark forest. So we have a very skilled hunter who's probably had many heads cut off in the previous iterations, and now reached a level where he's so comfortable to be inside the forest and get nourishment from it. And that's when, you know, this whole hide and seek with his vision and feminine kind of happens. And he's very clear about his desire. The moment he looks at this one maiden, he knows he wants to marry her, right? So it's not something that he kind of discovers on the way or something. It's just part of the nourishment that he gets, and he instantly knows what he wants. So there is that aspect. And when we compare that to this story, where we start with a merchant and his sons, who are very rich, and
plenty of ego power, plenty of intellect.
Ego power, right? Plenty of intellect, have no dearth of money. And they start out with just, we don't know what we want. We just want to travel and see the world, really. And then they're blown by the wind to this.
There is that idea of like seeing the world, even from the previous story, right? Where it's like that next step is, I want to feed my vision.
Yes.
Right. I don't want to live in the world. I don't want to move my body somewhere else. I want to see the world.
Yes.
And I think so for me, it's not a question of like the body is better than the mind or the mind is better than body. It's of course a question of coordination, right? You'll have people who are biased and they're like, well, can't I do it all through the mind, or can't I do it all through the body? I'm a dancer. I don't want to read these books. And that's okay. But I think when these stories zoom in, these stories are not like, oh, here's what you need to do with your life. They're zooming into very specific cases, which each of us can decide if they're relevant to us or not in any given point in our lives, right? And so typically there's a point where, you know, the beginning, the starting condition of the story is where they're already very rich, they're already sort of, you know, very empowered and accomplished in these areas. And when the story starts at that point, right, the question naturally that the story is trying to show you through the diorama is, what is next after this? Right? So if you're like, you know, there's all this additional stuff I want to continue exploring intellectually, and it's like, what are you stopping? You keep going. But at some point when you hit the limit, right, it will beg the question of like, well, what is beyond this? And obviously, like when you've hit the limit of intellect, the only other place to go is, well, more intellect. I mean, it's kind of endless if you want it to be, or into the body. And then once you start going into the body, it will be like, you know, another 190 rounds, right, before you hit the nickel, right, hit the target. But it could be the same thing. It's cyclical. So if you start with the body, it's like, all I do is yoga, all I do is like breath work and all these things. I don't like to read these books. And you've reached the limit of that, right? The natural question is, what is beyond that? And I mean, you could live your whole life and just be intellectual, just be embodied. And whatever, I mean, if that's your bliss, that's your bliss, right? There is no should, right? It's just, these are just showing you different possibilities. It's like flipping through a Darwin sort of naturalist sort of set of illustrations of the different plants and different life cycles of things, right? And you can just say these different archetypes. What resonates with me now? What can I take insight from? What serves as a good roadmap for where I am? And the roadmap I'm describing now may be like, yeah, I'm not even going to worry about that for like the next, you know, 3 weeks of my road trip. That's like far on down the line. But I'll keep that map in my back pocket to know to pull it out when I get there. That's kind of
yeah. So yeah. So what reflections would you recommend for the week?
Okay.
The exercise that you would.
So for the exercise, I think, so like in that story of the Swan Maidens and the Duck Hunter, we had talked in that story about getting nourishment and insight from the deep, dark forest, right? So to be comfortable in the dark and seek nourishment and all the other things that he did in that version of the story. Here, it's similar action of like inner masculine, inner feminine, healing, reconciliation. But the focus of mechanism is different. And here the focus is on the element of delight. So I think what I would say is the exercise would be, again, the fourth principle, no expectation of participation. You can do this. It's a suggested exercise only if you want. But if you did want to do it, between now and the next Sunday session, you would get some paper, go to a quiet place for like 5 or 10 minutes in your home, or if your home is like a zoo because it's got people like, sort of all over the place, in your car or just outside in the park, socially distanced, right? So if you're driving to the supermarket to buy food, you park. Before you get out, you sit for an extra 10 minutes. No one's going to miss you. And you pull out some paper and you reflect on these questions. And the question to reflect on is the question of delight, and to seek the place within you where you find delight in your own inner self. Okay. What is it about you? The thing you love to do, or just the thing about yourself that gives you delight for no reason. Okay. So let's say you love to play the violin, right? And you're not even a professional musician. I just love to play the violin for no good reason. I'm not good enough to be a professional. If anything, it's cost me extra money. I built an extra studio in my basement so my kids don't bother me when I'm playing violin, whatever. Okay. But something about this activity gives me this feeling of delight. And it's almost as you get older, like you realize there are these things that are blessings that, like, I'm glad I never made a living out of, something like violin, as just a random example. Because if I did, I would be a professional sort of musician in the realm of fear, threat, and control in the marketplace. And you often lose the thing you love because it gets pummeled by the physics, the storm winds of the profane, right? So, but the thing is, and this is the key, it's not that playing the violin or playing golf or playing tennis or whatever it is, singing, brings me delight. Right? You can externalize it in that way, but in finding delight within yourself, what I would encourage you to do is think about it in the reverse way, which is there's something about golf, there's something about tennis, there's something about yoga or whatever that draws delight out of me. This feeling of like, wow, that's delightful, right? And it is specific to you. It draws something out of you precisely because it's specific to you and coming out of you, right? And the proof is that, I may love tennis and the guy next to me absolutely hates it. It's like he just looks at a tennis racket and he gets nauseous, right? So it's not tennis because you're like, oh, it's just tennis. Everybody likes tennis. It's not true, right? So it's not the tennis that brings you delight. It's the tennis that draws something specific and unique about you that evokes delight out of you. Okay. And so the question and reflection then is like, what does that feel like in your body? What does the experience of delight, the element of delight, what does this musical golden lion of delight feel like in your body? Is it in your arms and legs? Is it in your throat when you sing? Or is it when you hit the tennis ball really hard and ace the shot? there's this like feeling in the back of your spine or the back of your head, this hood that comes over you. It's like, sort of pleasure. And I would use sort of your own inner vocabulary to describe what it actually feels like in your body. It feels like a bus coming up out of my chest or whatever, a fountain, whatever. I would encourage you not to use like the dry, scraggly skeletal words of like, well, it's a serotonin rush or biochemicals or whatever. It's like, you can use that if you want, but put that aside for now. Use your own sort of inner custom vocabulary so that it's very precise and doesn't bring in the baggage of like, you're like, oh, it's my animus, it's my anima. It's like, if that's the way you have to do it, that's the way you have to do it. But for this exercise, leave all that other stuff at the door. Those are the words that other people have come up with, right? It's a path that others have made. And because others have made it, it's not your path because someone else has gone on that path already. Right? So use your own words as much as you can to express what this feeling of delight feels like in your body. How do you embody this delight? Where in your body do you feel it when it happens? What does it feel like? I mean, there's more that you can do with it beyond that, but if you just do that, that will be very potentially very powerful. So that's the suggestion. Give that a try, only if you want. Only if you want.
Right. Thanks, Artie. So I'll just get back in the background so you could.
We'll close the session.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Great. So I'll go ahead and close the session. Thanks everyone for being here. The next session is next Sunday. It's free, open to everyone. Feel free to invite others if you like. And I'll go ahead on both and drop the link for the next session. You can sign up for now if you want. And then I'll go ahead and close the session. So I hereby close the session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me and with Gary. And thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, and the spiritual nourishment that comes from our shared sacred space together as a group. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great weekend, have a great week, and I will see you all in the next session. Thank you.